Somewhere in your feed, there is a video with a title almost exactly like this one. 1953. A team of state mine inspectors goes down a shaft. They come back up, and within weeks the state orders the entire thing filled with concrete. No explanation given. No report released. Just a slab of grey where a hole in the ground used to be. It is a good story. It has a date, a uniform, and a locked door, and those three things are all a story really needs. But here is the part that never makes it into those videos. In 1953, a mine inspector in the United States had just been handed something he had never held before in his life. Actual power. The legal authority to walk into a working mine, look at the men standing in the dark, and order every single one of them to the surface. And the reason he finally got that power is uglier than anything anyone has ever claimed to find down there. Let's go back. For most of American industrial history, a mine inspector was closer to a tourist than an enforcer. He could walk in. He could take notes. He could write a stern letter to the operator and file a copy with the state. And then the operator could fold that letter, put it in a drawer, and go right back to running the mine exactly the way he had been running it the day before. The inspector had no authority to stop anything. He could see a death coming, and he could describe it beautifully, in writing, in triplicate. Then came the night of December 21st, 1951, West Frankfort, Illinois. Orient No. 2 mine, one of the largest coal operations in the country. 4 days before Christmas, most of the crew had already gone home. Around 8 in the evening, an explosion tore through the workings. Coal dust ignition. 119 men died underground. Photographers got to the surface before the bodies did. The images that ran in the papers over the following week were not the sanitized industrial photographs Americans were used to. They were wives, standing at the pit head in coats. They were rows of stretchers. And Orient No. 2 was not some rogue operation nobody had ever heard of. It had been inspected. The hazards had been noted. Nothing had been required of anyone. That is what broke the logjam. In July of 1952, Congress passed the Federal Coal Mine Safety Act, and for the first time, federal inspectors in larger underground coal mines could issue orders that actually carried the force of law. If an inspector found an imminent danger, he could order the miners withdrawn. He could shut a section. In severe cases, he could shut the mine. Which means that when you hear the phrase, in 1953, the inspectors went down, and afterward the state ordered it sealed, you are not hearing evidence of a cover-up. You are hearing the sound of a brand new law working exactly the way it was designed to work in the very first years it existed. Sealing a mine after an inspection was not the anomaly. In the early 50s, it was the entire point. So what were they actually seeing down there? Because something got these places closed, and closed permanently, and closed in a way that suggests nobody ever wanted anyone going back in. Start with the air. Coal mines generate methane, and methane is only the famous one. The gas that kills quietly is what old miners called black damp, an atmosphere so stripped of oxygen and so loaded with carbon dioxide and nitrogen that a man walks into it and simply goes down. No smell, no warning. There is a reason the canary is the most famous animal in industrial history. In an abandoned working, with the ventilation fans switched off, black damp does not disperse. It pools, it sits in the low places and waits, and it will wait for 80 years. Then there is the ground itself. When you remove millions of tons of rock from underneath a landscape, the landscape does not simply agree to stay where it is. It settles. Old room and pillar mines left coal pillars standing to hold up the roof, and those pillars rot, crush, and fail on a geological schedule that has nothing to do with the human calendar. The result is subsidence. Sinkholes open under highways. Foundations crack. In parts of Pennsylvania, Illinois, and West Virginia, there are neighborhoods sitting on top of voids that nobody has mapped since the man who dug them died. Then there is water, and water is where the real horror lives. On January 22nd, 1959, at the Knox Coal Company operation near Port Griffith, Pennsylvania, miners had been cutting upward, illegally, toward the bed of the Susquehanna River. The rock between the mine and the riverbed got thin, Then it got thinner. Then the river came through. 10 billion gallons of water went into the tunnels. 12 men never came out. And to plug a hole in the bottom of a river, the company began pushing railroad cars into the whirlpool. Coal cars, gondolas, mine cars, then culm, then rock, then anything they could find. It took days. The Knox disaster effectively ended deep anthracite mining in the Wyoming Valley, and to this day the fastest way to describe it to someone who wasn't there is that the river ate the mine. And then there is fire. Coal seams burn. Once they start, they can burn underground for decades, fed by air moving through old workings, impossible to reach and impossible to flood. In 1962, in Centralia, Pennsylvania, a fire got into the coal beneath the town. It is still burning. The town was condemned. The population went from more than 1,000 to almost nobody, and the standard firefighting technique for a mine fire, the one that has been used for over a century, is to seal it. Cut off the oxygen, cap the shafts, pour concrete, and there is the plainest reason of all, the one that shows up in the county paperwork more often than any other. Children. An open shaft on an abandoned property is a hole in the world with no bottom and no fence, and for most of the 20th century there were tens of thousands of them scattered across the coal and metal country, unmarked, half hidden by brush, still open. States did not seal those because of what an inspector saw. They sealed them because of what a farmer found. So when a state agency orders a shaft filled, they are almost never hiding what is down there. They are containing it. And they are usually doing it because a child fell in, or a fire started, or a road collapsed, or the water in that shaft is now so acidic it is turning a creek orange 3 miles away. Now, here is where the other story comes in. Because if you have watched more than a couple of these videos, you already know what the sealed shaft is supposed to contain. Not gas, not fire, not water, something built, cut stone underground. Machined arches in a coal seam. Brickwork nobody can account for. The claim is always that the inspectors found architecture and the state buried it, and this is one more entry in a very long ledger of things being hidden from you. That ledger has a name now. It is called Tartaria, and it is worth understanding properly because the way it is usually explained is wrong in both directions. Here is the true part. Tartary was real, as a word. Open almost any European map from the 16th, 17th or 18th century and you will find it printed across the interior of Asia. Grand Tartary, Great Tartary. Cartographers put it there for centuries. That is not a fringe claim, that is basic cartographic history, and you can go look at the Ortelius atlases yourself. Here is the part that gets left out. Tartary was not a country, it was a shrug. It was what European mapmakers wrote across the enormous region they had not surveyed, could not administer, and did not particularly understand, stretching from the Caspian toward the Pacific. It was a label covering many distinct peoples, khanates and empires, applied from the outside by men who had never been there. When Russian and Chinese expansion mapped that interior properly, the word stopped being useful, and it fell off the maps. It did not get erased, it got replaced by detail. But the modern theory takes that vanished word and builds an empire underneath it. A single, advanced global civilization, wiped from the record, buried in mud. Its buildings stolen and rebranded by the powers that came after. And once you accept that premise, the evidence starts appearing everywhere, because the theory is designed so that everything counts. Take the mud flood. The core visual claim is buildings with windows below street level, half buried, as if a wave of sediment came through and the modern world simply built on top of it. Those windows are real. You can walk past them in Chicago, in Seattle, in Sacramento, and you can see them today. They are also fully documented, and the documentation is more interesting than the theory. Chicago in the 1850s was built on flat, waterlogged ground with no drainage and a cholera problem. So the city made a decision that sounds insane and was completely real. It raised the streets. Engineers jacked entire masonry buildings up out of the mud on hundreds of screw jacks, some of them while the shops inside stayed open and customers kept walking in. George Pullman, before the rail cars, made his name doing exactly this work. The street level went up. The old ground floor became the basement. That is your buried window. Seattle did a version of the same thing after the fire of 1889, and you can pay money right now to walk through the abandoned original sidewalks under the current ones. Sacramento raised its streets after the floods of the early 1860s. None of this is secret. Cities did it, wrote it down, took photographs of it, and charged admission to the leftovers. Then there is the White City, the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago, the enormous neoclassical dream city that appeared on the lakefront and then vanished. The theory says it was too magnificent to have been built in 3 years, so it must have been salvaged from an older civilization and then destroyed to hide it. The actual explanation is stranger and, honestly, more impressive. Those buildings were never stone. They were wood and steel frames sprayed and molded with a material called staff, a mixture of plaster, cement, and fiber, painted white. It was theatrical scenery at the scale of a city. It was always meant to be temporary. It was cheap enough to be extravagant. And in 1894 much of it burned, which is precisely what happens when you build a city out of plaster and lath. Which brings us to the real question underneath all of this. The question that is actually worth asking, and that the sealed shaft video is really about: why don't they build like that anymore? Because that feeling is not stupid. Stand in front of a 1910 courthouse in a small, collapsing county seat. Look at the carved swags and the terracotta lion heads and the marble stair, and then look at the building the county put up in 1994. Something did happen, and the honest answer is economic, which is why nobody makes videos about it. In 1900, labor was cheap and materials were expensive. A stone carver, a plasterer, a bricklayer's apprentice, all of them worked for wages that would horrify a modern tradesman in an economy with essentially no safety regulation and no benefits. Ornament was not a luxury. Ornament was the cheap part. And it got cheaper because ornament was industrialized. Companies like Northwestern Terracotta mass-produced architectural detail from molds and sold it out of catalogues. A builder in Kansas could flip through a book, order a cornice, order pressed metal ceilings, order cast-iron columns, and have the classical world delivered by rail. Those lion heads are not the fingerprints of a lost civilization. They are the fingerprints of a very good supply chain. Then the ratio flipped. Labor got expensive, which is a good thing, and was fought for by people who died in mines like Orient No. 2. Land got expensive. Steel and glass and curtain wall got cheap. Buildings became things you finance, depreciate, and replace, and you do not carve a lion into an asset you intend to write off in 30 years. So the grandeur did not get stolen from you by a conspiracy. It got priced out. And the same industrial economy that carved those cornices is the one that filled those shafts, and it is the one that killed those 119 men 4 days before Christmas. Which leaves us back at the concrete. I want to be fair to the people who believe the other version because the impulse behind it is not crazy. Institutions do lie. Records do get destroyed. Mining companies falsified ventilation reports for a century. The Knox operation was cutting where it was forbidden to cut. Companies buried survey maps because accurate maps meant liability, and the reason we cannot tell you exactly what is under some of those Pennsylvania towns is not that the state hid it. It is that the operator never drew it. So yes, something was covered up in American mining, constantly, systematically. It was just never a civilization. It was the ordinary, documented, deeply boring evil of men who knew the roof was going to come down and sent the shift in anyway. When you see that shaft cap on a hillside, you are not looking at a lid on a lost world. You are looking at a headstone. Somebody, decades ago, decided that whatever was underneath was dangerous enough that no one should ever go in again. And they were right. The men who poured that concrete were not burying a secret from you. The story we tell about the concrete says a lot more about us than it does about the whole. If this is the kind of history you want, the version with the receipts still attached, subscribe now. Next, I'm taking apart the Star Fort claim and why an entire genre of internet history refuses to accept the most obvious explanation for why those walls are shaped like that. That one is on screen right now.